The easiest part to clean is the mouthpiece. Simply wash it with soap and warm water. A mouthpiece brush is an essential tool for this to clean buildup from the back bore, which is the interior part of the shank. But if you don't have a mouthpiece brush, you could use a Q-tip or a pipe cleaner in a pinch. Alternately, as long as your mouthpiece is made of metal, and most are, it can get cleaned in the dishwasher. Plastic mouthpieces may not fare so well, so check with the manufacturer before putting them through a dishwasher. If the mouthpiece should become stuck, that's something you should leave for a technician. Don't attempt to grasp it, for instance, with a pair of pliers and twist it out. You could damage the mouthpiece or tear the lead pipe off the instrument, which is this section. Because it's a tapered fit, the mouthpiece should be pulled straight out from the receiver. And we use specialized tools like this mouthpiece puller to do that. Some shops, myself included, will pull a stuck mouthpiece for free as long as it's not catastrophically damaged or seized. So you have nothing to lose by waiting and taking it to a technician. It may not fit in the case with the mouthpiece stuck in, but if you can bear with that until getting it to a tech, it'll be well worth the hassle. The best way to keep the rest of the instrument maintained is to have it regularly cleaned by a technician, and I typically recommend having that done annually. But in between those cleanings, there are a lot of things you can do at home. First of all, oil your valves regularly. Ideally, it should be every time you play, but at least once a week. Always oil by removing the valve and applying oil directly to the body. You don't even have to pull it out all the way. This is far enough. Just apply oil and place it back in. When you reinstall the valve, make sure it lines up properly by slowly turning it until you hear a click. That click tells you the guide has properly indexed in the slot in the casing. This is the casing, the part of the instrument that the valve actually goes into. If the valve isn't properly aligned, air won't be able to pass through it, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. While we're discussing oiling, you should never oil through the holes in the bottom caps. Those holes are there as vents, not for oil. The bottom caps collect a lot of debris that comes through your instrument, so oiling through that hole could release that debris, which can interfere with the valves. If your bottom caps are stuck, we'll talk about how to deal with that in a few minutes as well. Stuck slides are a common problem, and while I'm not going to advise you how to free them in this video because it's a way you could do some damage to your instrument, a great way to prevent them from getting stuck is just to move them out and in every now and then, even if you don't feel you need to do so for tuning purposes. They'll help break up any bits of corrosion before they have a chance to seize things up. If you have your instrument cleaned regularly, you shouldn't need to grease the slides because they'll be greased at the shop, but you can if you want with any good quality slide grease. Just remove the slide, apply grease to the inner tubes only, reinstall it, wipe off any excess that squishes out with a rag. Before we move on, I briefly want to talk about giving your instrument a bath by washing the whole instrument in soap and water. That's not something I recommend, but some players like to do it, and I know some band directors who advise it. So if you're going to give your instrument a bath, here are a few things to keep in mind. First, the instrument has to be fully disassembled so that water can have access to every area, and more importantly, dry from every area. So that means all the slides have to come out, the bottom caps have to come off, all the valves have to come out, and ideally you should know how to disassemble and reassemble the valves. It's easy to put the valves back together incorrectly, so if you're not 100% confident you know what you're doing, it's best not to start. Once the instrument is apart, use brushes specifically designed for your instrument to scrub it out. You'll need to purchase those brushes, so there are costs associated with doing this. Once the instrument is cleaned and rinsed, allow it to dry completely before reassembling. Give it at least 24 hours, and remember that the valves are hollow, so water can remain in there for a long time. Blow them out with compressed air through the hole in the bottom of the valve, and ensure that no water remains inside before reinstalling them. Now let's talk about a few quick fixes you can do at home, starting with the water keys. If you should lose a water key cork, you can make a temporary one by folding up a piece of masking tape to make a thick pad. I've put a little piece of paper on one side of this so that it doesn't get stuck to the hole on the instrument. Simply place it in, and that'll hold for a little while. If the spring on your water key breaks, you can wrap a hair tie around it, like so. And then continue to use it as normal. Avoid using a rubber band, as the sulfur in rubber can react with brass or silver and corrode the metal. As a last resort, you could put a band-aid or electrical tape over the hole on the instrument, but of course then you wouldn't be able to drain water through it, so you would have to manually remove the slide to dump water out occasionally. Next, we'll talk about valve caps. It's common for the bottom caps to become stuck over time so that you can't unscrew them. Normally that wouldn't be a problem, but if you want to wipe out the valve casings, it's necessary to take them off, and we'll discuss how to do that next. First, to free a stuck cap, the thing I typically do is strike it with a rawhide mallet. Just 2 or 3 rapid strikes are usually enough to break up the crud that's in there. Use a glancing blow and be careful that you're only striking the cap, not the casing, like so. Notice I'm not hammering directly onto it. I'm glancing off of it. More light taps is better than a few heavy whacks. Once a cap is loose, leave it in place until you've freed the other caps. Leaving it on will protect the threads on the inside while you strike the other caps, in the event that you would slip. If you don't have a rawhide mallet, you could use something as simple as a block of wood. Just strike as you would with a hammer, using a glancing blow. Don't use any sort of steel hammer, like a claw hammer, because steel is harder than brass or nickel and could severely damage the instrument. Never try to grasp a cap with a pair of pliers. If you can't free the cap by striking it, just leave it there until you can get to a technician. If you have a stuck valve, in other words, a valve that goes down and won't come back up, that's something best left to a technician. But one thing you can try is to remove the slide for that valve and drip some oil down through the tubes. A few drops in each is good. And then allow it to sit for about a half an hour to let that oil soak in. After that time is up, try pulling up on the valve just with your fingers to see if that's released it. If it hasn't, take it to a technician. You would never want to try to force a valve out by driving something into it from below. This is a Tuba valve I keep on hand that someone tried to do just that with. They saw this hole in the bottom and tried to drive it out with a screwdriver and just blew right through the bottom port there. Remember, valves are hollow, so they're not meant to be hammered on. Again, a stuck valve should just be taken directly to a technician. If your valves have become sluggish or sticky, you can try wiping them down to remove buildup or debris. Remove the valve and the bottom cap, and then using a clean, lint-free cloth and some rubbing alcohol or denatured alcohol, that's what I keep in this little bottle, wipe off the valve body. Then, take a cleaning rod and a piece of cloth, pull a corner through, and then wrap the cloth over the top of the rod to protect the interior of your instrument from the end of that metal rod. Wrap it around, apply a little alcohol, and run it in and out. Keep in mind that you don't want to use a piece of cloth that's too large because it could become stuck. This is a pretty thin piece of microfiber. It's probably about 10 inches by 10 inches. You wouldn't want to use anything larger than that. And if you have a thicker material like cotton, you would want to use a smaller piece of cloth. Final note about valves would be that if your instrument feels suddenly very stuffy or won't let any air through, especially if it happens after you've removed the valves to oil them, the first thing to inspect would be to make sure the valves are in the right order. On a trumpet, they'll usually be numbered 1, 2, and 3 somewhere on the spring barrel, which is this part here. Most modern trumpets have an internal spring, so you won't see this spring on the outside. But I'll pull it out of the way, and you can probably see there's a small 1 stamped right there. Typically, the first valve will be the one closest to you, the player. The third valve will be the furthest. The third valve will also have the longest slide of the 3 valves. On a larger brass instrument like euphonium or a tuba, the number will typically be stamped on top of the valve. You can see there's a 2 stamped on top of this one. If the valves are in the right order, make sure they're aligned properly. On some trumpets, the guide on it, this is the key on the guide, can lock in 180 degrees off from the correct position. This trumpet happens to not have that problem, but a lot of modern trumpets have a key sort of on both sides of the valve so it can lock off 180 degrees. You can usually make sure the valves are facing the right way by looking at those stamped numbers I just mentioned. Typically, the stamped number will face toward you, the player. On this instrument, they happen to face toward the lead pipe, but they do all face the same direction. If you check those things and you still can't get air through your instrument, talk to a technician. One final note about brass instruments and solder joints. If you should have a solder joint that breaks, for instance, one of these braces that holds the lead pipe to the bell, don't attempt to reattach it with any sort of adhesive. The best thing to use for a short-term solution is zip tie. Just zip it on over that joint, cut off the excess, and then when you do take your instrument to a technician, it will be easy for them to remove that zip tie and properly resolder the joint. I hope you found this information helpful, but if you have any further questions or you encounter an issue that I didn't cover here, please reach out and I'll do whatever I can to help you. If I've edited this video properly, my contact information should be showing up somewhere on the screen right now. Stay safe and thanks for watching.